Cowboy thought life was over, until 4 Apache widows called him husband. Jacob the cowboy rode slowly across the dry, dusty plains, his horse's hooves stirring up little clouds of dirt with every step. The sun was low in the sky, sending long shadows across the land, and a cool wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush. Jacob was alone, as he had been for many years. He had built a simple life on the edge of town with a small cabin, a few horses, and a modest herd of cattle. But despite the work, despite the routine, there was a quiet emptiness that followed him like a shadow. He thought about the years that had passed. Life had not been kind to him. He remembered the fire that had destroyed his first homestead, leaving him with nothing but memories and ashes. He remembered friends who had left him or died, leaving him to face the lonely stretches of the frontier by himself. He remembered nights when he had hoped for something more, for companionship, for family, and yet had ended up with only silence. His hair had grown thin, his face weathered by sun and wind. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard labor. Jacob often wondered if his life had already passed him by, if his best days were behind him. That afternoon, as he guided his horse down a narrow path by the river, Jacob noticed movement in the distance. 4 figures struggled near the water's edge. At first, he thought they might be children playing, but as he drew closer, he saw they were women. Their clothing was simple but worn, and they carried small bundles of supplies that looked heavy for their slender frames. Their horses had stopped, tangled in some reeds at the riverbank. The wind carried the sound of their soft, urgent voices, and Jacob realized they were trying to untangle the animals and gather their things.
Jacob felt a strange pull in his chest.
He had lived so long in solitude that seeing people in need stirred something he thought had long been gone. He guided his horse carefully toward them, raising a hand to show he came in peace. The women turned, startled, their eyes wide. For a moment, there was tension in the air, a quiet question of who the other person might be and whether he was friend or foe. Jacob spoke gently. "I can help," he said simply, his voice calm and steady, though he felt a small flutter of nerves in his chest. The women hesitated, exchanging quick glances. They seemed cautious, perhaps unused to strangers. One of them, who looked slightly older than the rest, stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp, and she held herself with a quiet dignity. "We do not need trouble," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We can manage." "I can help with the horses," he said. "You don't have to do it alone." "I've been around animals my whole life. I can untangle them quickly." There was a pause, then she nodded slightly. Jacob dismounted, moving slowly, careful not to startle the horses. He worked steadily, untying the knots and guiding the frightened animals back to stable ground. The women watched him closely, still cautious, but he sensed that their fear was slowly giving way to trust. When the last horse was freed, Jacob stood back and smiled. "There," he said. "All safe now." The women relaxed just a little, and the older one gave a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. "It is not often we meet someone willing to help." Her voice carried a tone of sincerity that touched something deep inside Jacob. He realized he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be thanked for more than just doing his duty. They introduced themselves in brief, careful words. Jacob learned that they were widows from a nearby Apache village. Their homes had been destroyed in recent conflicts, and they had been traveling to find a safe place to stay. Jacob listened, nodding, offering words of comfort where he could. He felt a warmth growing inside him, a feeling he had not experienced in many years. Helping them was not just an act of kindness. It was a connection, fragile but real, that reminded him of the life he had thought was gone forever. As the sun dipped lower, Jacob offered them a place to rest. His cabin was small, but it was clean and sturdy, with enough space for a fire, a few blankets, and a warm meal. The women hesitated, glancing at one another. The older woman spoke again. "We cannot stay long," she said. "We must continue our journey, but perhaps one night would be safe." Jacob nodded. "One night is fine," he said. "You can rest, have food, and your horses can be tended. Tomorrow, you can continue your journey if you wish." They accepted, and together they walked toward the cabin. Jacob carried a bundle of firewood while the women prepared the horses for the night. Inside he built a fire, the warm glow filling the small space. He cooked a simple meal of beans and bread, and they ate in silence at first, each person cautious, observing one another. But slowly, conversation began. The women shared stories of their past lives, of families lost and hopes held despite hardship. Jacob listened, genuinely interested, offering encouragement and sharing his own experiences in return. There was a moment when Jacob realized something extraordinary. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel lonely. These women, who had faced so much tragedy themselves, were open and strong. They carried courage and dignity, and their presence brought a new light into his life. He began to see that life had not ended for him. It had simply changed course, and perhaps fate had brought him to this moment for a reason he could not yet fully understand. As the night settled over the plains, the fire crackled, and Jacob felt a calm he had not known in years. He thought about the women sleeping nearby, trusting him enough to stay in his small cabin for the night. He thought about the long road ahead of them, the challenges they faced, and the possibility that they had all found a temporary refuge, perhaps even a beginning of something more. Jacob did not know what the future held, but he felt a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. He realized that sometimes life, even after loss and loneliness, could surprise a person. It could bring people together in unexpected ways, weaving threads of trust, kindness, and new beginnings. As he drifted off to sleep, the cowboy who had once thought life was over felt the first true stirrings of something that might grow into hope, purpose, and connection. The plains outside were quiet, the wind whispering through the grass, carrying with it the promise of a new day. And for Jacob, the lonely cowboy, the first chapter of a remarkable new story was just beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a golden glow across the ranch. Jacob woke early, as he always did, and quietly stepped outside. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint smell of grass and earth. He glanced toward the cabin and saw the four widows already tending to the horses. Their movements were careful and deliberate, showing the strength that life had taught them. They were quiet, focused, but Jacob noticed how their eyes occasionally met his, soft with gratitude and curiosity. He made his way toward them, carrying a small bucket of water for the horses. "Good morning," he said simply, trying to keep his voice light. One of the women, the eldest among them, nodded politely. "Good morning," she replied. There was a calmness in her tone, a sense of trust that had begun to grow since the night before. Jacob worked alongside them, helping to clean and feed the horses. It was quiet work, the kind that allowed conversation to come naturally. Slowly, stories began to emerge. One woman spoke of her childhood near the mountains, where her family had farmed the land for generations. Another shared memories of her late husband, a brave man who had fought to protect their village. Their voices were steady, but carried a weight of sorrow, and Jacob listened closely, feeling the depth of their experiences. As they worked, Jacob felt something shift within him. He had spent so long in solitude that he had almost forgotten the comfort of shared labor, the simple satisfaction of working together toward a common goal. Watching the widows care for their animals and each other, he realized how resilient they were. Life had been harsh, but they had survived, and in their survival there was strength and dignity that inspired him. By mid-morning the chores were done. Jacob invited the women to sit by the fire outside the cabin. He brought out fresh bread and a small pot of stew he had prepared. The women hesitated at first, but the hunger in their eyes outweighed caution. They accepted the meal with quiet thanks.
As they ate, conversation began to flow more freely.
Jacob asked about their travels, about the people they had met, about the challenges they had faced. Each woman spoke in turn, carefully choosing her words, and Jacob listened, offering understanding and encouragement. One of the younger widows, who had remained silent for much of the morning, finally spoke. "We have traveled far," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We have lost our homes, our families, and yet we move forward. Sometimes it feels as though the world has forgotten us." Jacob looked at her, seeing the sadness behind her eyes. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "The world may have been cruel," he said, "but it has not forgotten you. You are here, and that means you are still strong. You have survived when others would have given up." The words seemed to touch something deep within the young widow. She nodded, a small spark of hope appearing in her eyes. Jacob realized that he was not the only one who had been lonely or burdened by loss. These women had endured unimaginable hardships, yet they continued to move forward. There was a quiet bravery in their resilience, and Jacob felt honored to witness it. After the meal, Jacob suggested they begin to repair some of the damage the journey had caused to their temporary home. The cabin was small, but it could be improved with a little effort. He showed them how to mend broken tools, how to reinforce the fence, and how to organize their supplies so that everything would be easier to manage. The widows watched closely, asking questions and offering their own ideas. It was a collaboration, each person contributing what they could, and Jacob felt a sense of satisfaction he had not known in years. As the day progressed, Jacob noticed something remarkable. The widows were not just accepting his help, they were learning from it. They asked questions, tried new techniques, and began to take pride in the little victories, whether it was a horse properly fed or a fence successfully repaired. Jacob felt a quiet joy in seeing them gain confidence. In teaching them, he found himself growing as well. He realized that life had more to offer than survival. It offered connection, learning, and the chance to help others grow. By late afternoon, the work was done, and the ranch looked brighter, more organized and welcoming. Jacob suggested they take a break and walk toward the nearby stream. The widows agreed, and together they moved across the open land, the warm breeze brushing against their faces. For a moment there was no past, no sorrow, only the simple pleasure of being together in the wide open world. Near the stream, the widows began to wash clothes and rent supplies. Jacob watched them, noting the small routines that made life meaningful. It was in these moments, ordinary yet significant, that trust began to deepen. The women began to speak more openly, sharing small details about their lives and dreams. One woman spoke of her hope to one day have a place where she could plant a garden and grow food for her family. Another expressed a desire to learn more about the world beyond the plains, to explore new ideas and experiences. Jacob listened, offering encouragement and sharing his own quiet dreams. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jacob and the widows returned to the cabin. The fire was rekindled, and the smell of a simple dinner filled the air. They sat together, talking and laughing softly, the earlier caution now replaced with a sense of camaraderie. Jacob noticed how naturally their presence had begun to fill the space, how their voices and movements brought warmth to his once lonely home. That night, as the widow settled down to sleep on blankets near the fire, Jacob remained awake for a while, reflecting on the day. He thought about the journey that had brought them together, about the struggles they had endured, and about the unexpected sense of purpose he now felt. He realized that life had not ended for him. It had simply taken a new direction. He had been given an opportunity to help, to connect, and to rebuild something meaningful, not just for himself, but for others as well. Jacob understood that trust was fragile, and that it would take time to grow stronger. But he also knew that the first step had been taken. The widows had accepted his help, shared their stories, and allowed him to be part of their journey, even if only for a day. And in return, Jacob had opened his heart, allowing himself to feel connection, hope, and the quiet beginnings of joy. As he finally drifted to sleep, the cowboy felt a gentle peace. He had faced years of solitude, moments of despair, and the harsh realities of life on the frontier. Yet in this simple act of helping others, he found a glimmer of what he had thought lost forever. Life, he realized, had a way of surprising those who remained open, even when the path seemed dark. The wind whispered softly through the trees outside the cabin, carrying with it the promise of another day. Jacob, the lonely cowboy who had once thought his story was over, now understood that this was only the beginning. The connections made that day, the trust established, and the shared moments of work and laughter were building something far more meaningful than he had ever imagined. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, he held on to a quiet hope that life, even after hardship, could bring new beginnings, unexpected friendships, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. The days that followed were full of work, learning, and quiet companionship. Jacob and the four widows settled into a rhythm at the ranch. Each morning they tended to the animals, repaired fences, and cared for the small garden that Jacob had started near the cabin. The widows quickly proved their strength and skill. They moved with precision, tending to horses, feeding chickens, and helping Jacob sort the cattle. He watched them carefully, impressed by their determination and resilience. He realized that each of them carried a quiet strength, forged through hardship and loss, and that strength inspired him in return. Jacob began to teach them more than just the daily chores. He showed them how to recognize signs of illness in the animals, how to identify edible plants in the surrounding plains, and how to protect themselves from dangers that could appear without warning. The widows were quick learners, their eyes bright with focus and curiosity. They asked questions, repeated instructions, and experimented cautiously under his guidance. Jacob felt a deep satisfaction in teaching them, knowing that his knowledge could make their lives safer and easier. As the days passed, the widows began to open up more about themselves. Each had endured tremendous loss, yet their spirits remained unbroken. They spoke of husbands who had died defending their people, of villages destroyed, and of family members lost to sickness or conflict. Jacob listened with empathy, never interrupting, never judging. He began to understand the depth of their courage and the resilience it took to continue moving forward. In return, he shared fragments of his own life, his years of loneliness, the fires that had destroyed his home, the friends he had lost along the way. Slowly, the walls that had kept him isolated began to crumble. One evening after a long day of work, they gathered around the fire. The sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, and the stars began to peek through the fading light. Jacob looked at the widows and felt a strange mix of gratitude and wonder. These women, who had come into his life unexpectedly, had already begun to fill a space he thought empty forever. He realized that they were no longer just guests. They were becoming a part of his life in ways he had never imagined. The eldest widow, whose name was Ayoka, spoke softly. "You have been kind to us," she said. "Not many would offer help without expecting something in return. You are different." Jacob nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I do not expect anything," he replied. "I only know what it is to be alone, and I know what it is to need help. I would not ask anyone to endure what I have endured alone." Her eyes softened and she placed a hand gently on her chest. "Your heart is large," she said. "It has room for many things, and yet it is gentle. That is rare." Jacob felt warmth rise in his chest. He had not received such words in many years, and the honesty in her voice made him realize that these connections were more than simple gratitude. They were trust, respect, and a recognition of shared humanity. Over the next few days, Jacob noticed a subtle change in the household. The widows began to take initiative, helping without being asked, preparing meals and arranging tasks efficiently. Their confidence grew, and Jacob encouraged them every step of the way. He marveled at how quickly they adapted, how capable they were, and how naturally they began to work together as a team. He also began to see small gestures of affection, shared smiles, quiet conversations, and moments where they would glance toward him with appreciation. Jacob himself felt a shift within him. He had spent so many years focused on survival, on work, on the routine of loneliness, that he had almost forgotten the joy of companionship. Being needed, being respected, and being trusted by these women stirred emotions he had thought long buried. He felt protective, not out of duty alone, but because he cared deeply for their well-being. And in that care he began to feel something he had not expected: hope. One afternoon a problem arose that tested their growing bond. One of the horses had become tangled in a fallen branch and was struggling to free itself. Jacob rushed to the scene and the widows followed, offering guidance and support. Together they worked carefully to free the horse, speaking in calm, reassuring tones. It took time, patience, and careful effort, but finally the horse was free. As it stepped back, shaking its mane, Jacob looked at the widows and saw the pride and relief on their faces. They had helped, contributed, and faced a small challenge together. In that moment he realized that trust had deepened. They were no longer just individuals sharing space. They were a team, a small family bound by shared experiences. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Jacob and the widows returned to the cabin. They prepared a simple meal and sat together, enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's company. Conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter, shared stories, and gentle teasing. Jacob marveled at how different the atmosphere was from his years of solitude. There was warmth here, a sense of connection, and the beginnings of joy that felt both foreign and familiar. Later that evening, as the fire burned low, the widows began to speak of their dreams. One spoke of wanting to learn more about farming, of growing food that could sustain a small community. Another expressed a desire to explore beyond the plains, to see the rivers, mountains, and towns she had only heard about. Jacob listened, encouraging their curiosity and reinforcing their sense of possibility. He realized that he could be more than just a caretaker. He could be a guide, a mentor, and a companion in their journey. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Jacob reflected on the transformation that had begun. What had started as a chance encounter at the river had grown into something meaningful. The widows, once strangers, had become companions. They had shared their struggles, their skills, and their hearts, and Jacob had responded with care, patience, and respect. He realized that life, even after hardship, had a way of creating unexpected bonds. In the quiet moments before sleep, Jacob considered the term the widows had begun to use quietly and respectfully: husband. At first he had been taken aback, unsure what it truly meant. But now, after days of shared work, laughter, and trust, he began to understand. It was not simply a title, it was a recognition of care, responsibility, and partnership. It symbolized trust, respect, and the hope of stability after years of loss. Jacob felt a sense of humility and wonder at the depth of that recognition. The night passed quietly, filled with the gentle sounds of the wind and the occasional rustle of horses settling nearby. Jacob lay awake for a while, thinking about the days to come. He knew challenges would arise. Life on the plains was never simple, but he felt ready to face them. With the widows at his side sharing knowledge, skill, and courage, he realized that he was no longer alone. Together they could face difficulties, protect each other, and create a life that was meaningful and full of connection. As he finally drifted into sleep, Jacob felt a sense of peace and anticipation. Life had surprised him, bringing strangers into his home and heart in ways he had never expected. He understood that the bonds forming were fragile, yet strong, and that with care and patience, they could grow into something lasting. The widows, too, had begun to see hope in safety and trust, and in the possibility of shared life. For the first time in many years, Jacob felt that the loneliness that had shadowed him for so long was lifting. He had discovered that even after loss, even after isolation, life could offer connection, purpose, and the quiet beginnings of happiness. And in that understanding, he felt the first true sense of belonging he had known in decades. Outside the cabin, the night stretched across the plains, filled with the soft rustle of grass and the distant calls of birds. The stars shone brightly, silent witnesses to the unfolding story. Jacob, the once lonely cowboy, now had companions who trusted him, respected him, and shared their lives with him. He understood that the days ahead would bring more work, more challenges, and more discoveries, but he felt ready. With these women by his side, life was no longer just survival. It was a journey of connection, trust, and shared growth. The days at the ranch had grown into a steady rhythm, but the quiet life of the plains was never without its challenges. Jacob, the cowboy, had come to rely on the widows as much as they relied on him. They worked together from dawn until dusk, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and maintaining the cabin and garden. Their partnership was becoming more than practical. It was a bond built on trust, respect, and shared effort.
One morning, while Jacob and the widows were mending the fence along the northern edge of the property, they noticed movement in the distance.
4 men on horseback were approaching, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. Jacob's chest tightened as he instinctively assessed the situation. He did not know these men, and the plains were filled with those who sought to take advantage of others. The widows noticed his tension and looked to him for guidance. Jacob stepped forward calmly, raising a hand to signal the men to stop. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice firm but not hostile. The men slowed, stopping a short distance away. One of them, slightly taller than the others, spoke. "We're just passing through," he said. But there was an edge to his voice, a suggestion that their intentions might not be entirely honest. Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Passing through," he repeated.
"You're near my property. You must keep your distance."
The men exchanged glances, and the tension in the air was thick. The widows moved closer to Jacob, not out of fear, but to stand together as a unit. Jacob felt a surge of pride at their courage. They were not simply relying on him. They were ready to face challenges alongside him. The leader of the group dismounted and stepped forward. "We don't want trouble," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But we've heard about your ranch, and it seems like there's good land here, with resources. Perhaps we can make an arrangement." Jacob shook his head firmly. "This is my land. I will not negotiate with threats or intimidation. Leave now, and no harm will come to you." The men laughed, a low, mocking sound. "We'll see about that," the leader said. Jacob felt a protective surge rise within him. He turned to the widows. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "We can handle this together, but be ready to act if necessary." The widows nodded. They understood the situation clearly, and they did not hesitate. They positioned themselves strategically, helping to guide the horses and keep the younger animals safe. Jacob and the men circled each other warily, tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. Suddenly, one of the men lunged toward a small pen of cattle. Jacob reacted immediately, shouting and stepping between the man and the animals. The other widows moved quickly, using ropes and careful coordination to prevent the men from causing damage. It was a tense standoff, a test of skill, courage, and trust. Jacob realized that he was not alone. These women whom he had only recently met were willing to face danger with him, using their wits and strength to protect what they had built. After several moments, the men recognized that the cowboy and the widows were prepared and unyielding. They muttered curses under their breath and slowly backed away, mounting their horses. Jacob and the widows watched them ride off, relief washing over them. The ranch was safe, but the incident had reminded them that life on the plains was never simple or predictable. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jacob and the widows sat together near the fire. They were quiet for a moment, processing the tension of the day. Then Ahioka, the eldest widow, spoke. "You handled them well," she said. "But we must be prepared. The world is not always kind, and people will test us." Jacob nodded.
"I know, but we have each other now."
That is more important than any threat. The widows shared small smiles, their confidence strengthened by the day's events. They had faced danger together and had emerged unscathed. It was a powerful reminder that their partnership was not just about work or shelter. It was about mutual protection, trust, and courage. Jacob felt a deep sense of pride in their resilience. He realized that these women were not just companions, they were equals, capable of facing the challenges of the frontier with skill and determination. Over the next few days, Jacob and the widows strengthened the ranch further. They repaired broken fences, reinforced the cabin, and created secure areas for the animals. Each task was an opportunity to build trust, to work as a team, and to prepare for the uncertainties of life on the plains. The widows learned quickly, their confidence growing with each success. Jacob encouraged them at every step, recognizing their efforts and celebrating their victories. One afternoon, a sudden storm approached, the sky darkening rapidly as clouds gathered overhead. The wind picked up, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Jacob quickly organized the widows, moving the animals to safer areas and securing the cabin. They worked efficiently, calling out instructions to each other over the roar of the wind. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of calm and determination among them. They had faced challenges before, and they knew how to act together. When the storm passed, the ranch had sustained only minor damage. Jacob looked at the widows and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced the storm with courage without complaint, and had worked together seamlessly. It was a testament to the bond that had formed between them, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Ahioka spoke again. "You have shown us that life can still be good," she said. "Even after loss, even after hardship, we can find safety, care, and even happiness." Jacob felt a lump in his throat. He knew that he had learned the same lesson from them. Life had brought them together in unexpected ways, and through their shared efforts they had created a home, a family, and a sense of hope that had been missing for too long. The younger widows, too, spoke of their gratitude. They had learned skills they had never known, gained confidence in their abilities, and felt a sense of belonging that they had not experienced in years. Jacob listened, realizing that he had become more than a caretaker. He had become a partner, a guide, and a trusted presence in their lives. And in return, they had become his companions, his friends, and a source of strength and joy that he had thought lost forever. As night fell, the wind softened, and the stars appeared in the sky. Jacob reflected on the events of the day, the threats, the courage, and the resilience of the widows. He understood that life on the frontier was unpredictable, that danger could arise at any moment. But he also knew that together they could face whatever challenges came their way. They were stronger as a unit, and the bond they shared was becoming unbreakable. Jacob thought about the future. There would be more storms, more threats, and more challenges. But he felt ready, knowing that the widows were by his side. They had proven their strength, their courage, and their loyalty. And in that knowledge, Jacob felt a sense of peace and determination. Life had brought him unexpected companions, and with them he could face anything. The night passed quietly, filled with the sounds of the plains. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow on the cabin and the faces of the women who had become his family. Jacob lay awake for a while, reflecting on the day and the journey that had brought them together. He realized that life, even after loss and hardship, could bring unexpected blessings, connections, and hope. For the first time in many years, Jacob felt that his life was no longer just about survival. It was about partnership, trust, and shared growth. The widows had taught him that courage and resilience could be found in the most unlikely places, and that even after great loss, life could offer new beginnings. And as he finally drifted into sleep, Jacob felt a deep sense of gratitude for the family he had found, the home they were building, and the future that awaited them together. The weeks that followed brought a new sense of calm and purpose to the ranch. Jacob and the four widows had settled into a rhythm, their days filled with work, care, and quiet companionship. The fences were mended, the animals fed, and the cabin well maintained. The garden had begun to flourish, and the small household had taken on a life of its own. Jacob watched the widows as they moved about their tasks, impressed by their skill, dedication, and grace. He realized how much life had changed in such a short time, and how much hope had returned to his heart. Word of the household spread slowly through the nearby town and the surrounding plains. Some neighbors were curious, some skeptical, and some deeply respectful. There were whispers about the cowboy who lived with 4 Apache widows, but those who came to see them left with a sense of admiration. They saw a group of people working together, supporting one another, and thriving despite hardship. Jacob felt a quiet pride in this. He had once thought his life was over, that he would spend his days alone in the endless plains. But now he saw the power of connection, community, and trust. One day a group of townspeople came by, seeking Jacob's help. A local family had lost part of their barn to a storm, and they were struggling to repair it. Jacob agreed to help and invited the widows to join him. Together, they worked with precision and care. The widows carried tools, measured planks, and reinforced beams, while Jacob guided the work and offered instruction. The townspeople watched in amazement at how capable and confident the women were. They worked efficiently, their efforts coordinated, and the barn was soon repaired. After the work was done, the townspeople expressed their gratitude. "I've never seen such skill and teamwork," one man said. "You've not only helped us, but you've shown us what can be achieved when people work together." The widow smiled, modest yet proud, and Jacob felt a sense of fulfillment. They were no longer just survivors. They were respected members of the community, capable of contributing and teaching, as well as receiving support. That evening, as they returned to the ranch, the widows spoke softly among themselves. "We have found more than safety here," Ahioka said. "We have found trust, respect, and a place where we belong." Jacob listened, feeling a warmth he had not known in years. He understood that he had received just as much from them as they had from him. Their courage, wisdom, and resilience had taught him that life could still be rich, meaningful, and full of connection, even after long periods of loneliness and loss. Over the following days, the household grew closer. They shared meals, stories, and laughter. Small routines, like preparing the garden, feeding the animals, and repairing fences, became rituals of connection. Jacob noticed the quiet gestures, a smile exchanged while working, a gentle hand offered to steady a horse, a shared glance that spoke volumes without words. Trust and understanding deepened with every passing day. The word husband, which the widows had used at first with tentative respect, now carried genuine meaning. It was not merely a title. It was a symbol of the care, partnership, and bond that had grown between them. One afternoon, Jacob and the widows were working near the river when a traveling merchant appeared. He had heard of the ranch and the unusual household, and had come to offer goods and supplies. Jacob greeted him warmly, introducing the widows. The merchant was impressed, not just by the well-kept ranch, but by the skill, knowledge, and confidence of the women. He spoke of the town's respect for them and the admiration they had earned. Jacob felt a sense of pride swell within him. Their household, once fragile and uncertain, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope. As the days turned into weeks, Jacob noticed another subtle change. The widows had begun to rely on him in deeper ways. They trusted his judgment, sought his guidance, and included him in decisions about the ranch and their lives. In turn, he relied on their knowledge, their insight, and their courage. They had become true partners, each contributing to the household in unique and valuable ways. Jacob realized that he had not only found companionship, but also a sense of family and belonging that he had thought impossible. The community, once hesitant, began to accept them fully. Neighbors visited, seeking advice or simply companionship. The ranch became a place of learning, where people came to see the skill and cooperation that had transformed the land. Jacob and the widows welcomed visitors, sharing stories of the challenges they had faced, the lessons they had learned, and the strength that had carried them through. They taught the children of the town how to care for animals, how to plant and nurture crops, and how to face hardships with patience and courage. One evening, as the sun set and the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and purple, Jacob and the widows gathered by the fire outside the cabin. They spoke quietly, reflecting on their journey, the hardships they had endured, and the life they had built together. Ahioka, with a calm and gentle voice, spoke for all of them. "Life has been difficult, but we have found safety, trust, and hope here. We have each other, and that is more than we could have dreamed." Jacob nodded, feeling the depth of her words. He knew that they had all come together at the right time, that fate had brought them together, and that their bond was now unbreakable. As night settled over the plains, Jacob looked at the 4 women who had transformed his life. He realized that he no longer thought of himself as alone or past his prime. Life had brought him unexpected companions, trust, and love in its own way. He understood that the journey of survival had led to a new chapter, a chapter of shared life, mutual respect, and family. The widows had not only found a protector and guide in him, but he had found in them friendship, courage, and a sense of belonging that he had long thought lost. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of more days, more work, and more shared experiences. Jacob knew that challenges would continue to arise. The plains were never without danger. But he also knew that together they could face anything. They had built a home, a community, and a life that was meaningful and full of purpose. Each day, their bond grew stronger, and the word husband, once tentative, now reflected a partnership built on care, trust, and shared resilience. Jacob reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as a chance encounter at the river had blossomed into a household of trust, courage, and connection. The widows, once strangers, had become family. Their shared efforts, their courage in the face of danger, and their willingness to trust and support one another had transformed not only the ranch, but their hearts. Jacob felt gratitude not just for the companionship he had found, but for the lessons they had taught him, lessons about resilience, hope, and the quiet power of human connection. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Jacob lay down by the fire, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch. The horses were calm, the cabin secure, and the widows resting peacefully nearby. He felt a sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that life, even after loss and hardship, could offer new beginnings. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty together, and now they had built something lasting, a home, a family, and a life filled with trust and love. For the first time in many years, Jacob knew that life was not over. It had only changed direction, bringing him 4 extraordinary women who had transformed his days and filled his heart with hope. He understood that the journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every challenge. Together, they would continue to face whatever the future held, united by the bond they had forged and the trust they had earned. The plain stretched quietly under the moonlight, vast and still. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the presence of the widows nearby. He understood that life could surprise even those who had long given up hope. It could bring companionship, courage, and family in the most unexpected ways. And with that understanding, he drifted into sleep, content, hopeful, and ready for whatever the coming days would bring. In the weeks and months ahead, their lives continued with work, laughter, and learning. They faced small challenges, storms, and occasional misunderstandings, but they always faced them together. Jacob had become more than a cowboy. He had become a partner, a guide, and a protector. The widows had become more than guests. They were family, friends, and equals who shared his life and dreams. And together they created a home where trust, courage, and hope could thrive. A home that was a true testament to the power of human connection and resilience.